Have you ever found yourself in the middle of an argument, heart pounding, every word ready to strike? Each sentence feels like a weapon, but what if someone told you you've already lost the moment you opened your mouth? What if the greatest power isn't in what you say, but in what you don't? Let's unravel the truth behind silent power. Picture this. You're standing in the middle of a heated argument. Your heart races. Every word feels like a blade, every sentence a battle cry. You carefully shape your next response, determined to prove your point. But across from you, the other person is doing exactly the same. Neither of you is listening. You're both just waiting for the next chance to strike. And then Nietzsche enters the scene. He doesn't pick sides. He doesn't tell you what to say. Instead, he leans in and whispers something unsettling. You've already lost. Wait, what? You're fighting. You're standing your ground. You're defending yourself. How could that mean you've lost? According to Nietzsche, the moment you enter into a fight like this, you've already surrendered your power. True strength, he argued, doesn't come from proving you're right. It comes from something far more unexpected. So what exactly is this hidden power? And why does silence often speak louder than the sharpest words? Let's dive into Nietzsche's philosophy to discover the quiet trick that gives you real control. Most people believe that power comes from winning arguments, from proving others wrong, from taking over the conversation. But Nietzsche saw it differently. He believed power didn't live in words. It lived in control. So, why do people argue? If you've ever been in a heated debate, you know how quickly things can spiral. But have you ever stopped to ask yourself, why do we argue at all? Nietzsche would say, most arguments aren't about truth. They're about deeper, more fragile psychological needs. Ego protection. People argue because their sense of identity feels under threat. Admitting they're wrong feels like losing a piece of themselves, and the mind resists that with everything it has. Power struggle. Many arguments aren't rooted in facts or reason. They're silent battles for dominance. Who speaks last? Who controls the tone? Who makes the other person back down? Herd mentality. Some argue not because they believe their point, but because they want to be seen as smart, confident, or strong by others. Nietzsche saw these behaviors not as signs of strength, but of weakness. He believed that the moment you let someone provoke an emotional reaction in you, you've already lost control, and that's where his idea of the will to power enters the picture. It's one of his most famous concepts, and one of the most misunderstood. The will to power isn't about brute strength. It's about shaping reality with your will. And sometimes, the strongest act of power is choosing not to react. This is where Nietzsche's Übermensch comes in, his vision of the superior individual, the Jew. Übermensch doesn't react like everyone else. He doesn't argue just to win or to prove a point. He chooses when to speak and when to stay silent. Because power, to him, isn't about talking. It's about controlling the entire interaction. Imagine a tense boardroom meeting. Two people are arguing. One is loud, aggressive, determined to win. The other is calm, collected, listening more than speaking. They don't get pulled into emotional swings. But when they do speak, their words land like a thunderclap. Perfectly timed, unshakably firm, and suddenly, the whole room shifts. Who holds the real power? Nietzsche would say, the one who remains calm, the one who stays in control, the one who doesn't react emotionally, always wins in the end. Why is strategic silence more powerful than winning an argument? Because silence, when used with intention, isn't weakness. It's a weapon of the mind. Used skillfully, silence makes others uncomfortable. It forces them to reveal more than they meant to. It creates doubt. It makes people second-guess their own words. It builds tension, and tension, when used wisely, is control. The Übermensch, Nietzsche's idea of the superior human, doesn't simply stay quiet in arguments. He uses silence like a scalpel. A pause here, a moment of restraint there, a perfectly timed sentence that turns the entire conversation in his favor. That's the real battlefield. Nietzsche didn't believe power came from shouting matches or verbal victories. He believed true power was about mastery, mastery of yourself, mastery of the moment, and mastery of influence. Silence in this way is not the absence of words. It's a carefully chosen tool, a psychological lever, a silent sword used by the greatest minds in history, philosophers, business leaders, warriors, to dominate not just arguments, but entire arenas of thought and influence. Let's explore 3 such legendary figures who embodied this principle to perfection: Socrates, Steve Jobs, and Miyamoto Musashi. Socrates, the man who won. Without fighting, Socrates didn't argue in the traditional sense. He never shouted. He didn't attack. He didn't try to prove anyone wrong with volume or force. Instead, he used a deceptively simple technique, one that still shapes how we debate and teach today. It's known as the Socratic method, a method of questioning that leads others to expose the flaws in their own logic. Picture this: a proud Athenian politician stands before a crowd, boasting that he is the wisest man in the city. Socrates doesn't ridicule him. He doesn't correct him. He simply asks, "What is wisdom?" Eager to impress, the politician begins defining it. But with each question Socrates poses, cracks begin to show. The definition wobbles. The confidence fades. Eventually, the man stumbles, realizing he has no clear understanding of what he's been claiming all along. Socrates never had to say, "You're wrong." He let the man arrive at that realization on his own. That's the essence of silent power. You don't win by shouting. You win by guiding others to question themselves. Steve Jobs, the art of controlled conflict. Socrates led through questions. Steve Jobs led through strategic persuasion. Jobs wasn't afraid of conflict. He didn't avoid arguments. He engineered them. But unlike most people, he didn't waste energy debating over every tiny decision. His rule was simple but powerful. Don't fight battles that don't matter. But when it's important, go all. In one famous example, the design of the first iPhone. The engineers wanted physical buttons. It was the norm, the safe choice. Jobs had a radical vision, a full touchscreen. Instead of engaging in endless arguments, he let his team talk. He gave them space to express their doubts. He didn't force the idea down their throats. He guided them to see it. And over time, they realized, under his influence, that a touchscreen wasn't just bold, it was inevitable. Jobs didn't convince people with brute force. He made them believe it was their idea. That's the power of influence over control. Most people argue to prove they're right. Jobs argued to move people forward. And that's the difference. If your words don't lead to action, they're just noise. Miyamoto Musashi, the silent samurai who won before the fight. Even began, we've explored philosophy and business. Now step into the world of combat. Miyamoto. Musashi, the undefeated samurai, grasped a truth so profound it transcends the sword. The best way to win a fight is to never draw your weapon. Musashi fought and won over 60 deadly duels. But his true genius wasn't just in swordsmanship. His greatest victories, they were psychological. He didn't just defeat opponents physically. He unraveled them mentally. before the first blow was ever struck. One of his most famous battles was against Sasaki Kojiro, a fearsome swordsman renowned for his lightning-fast technique. Everyone expected a dramatic clash, but Musashi didn't show up on time. He deliberately arrived hours late, letting Kojiro simmer in frustration. By the time the duel began, Kojiro was seething, blinded by anger, emotionally off balance. And, in that vulnerable state, he made critical mistakes, allowing Musashi to defeat him effortlessly. Musashi knew something Nietzsche would echo centuries later. If your enemy is emotional, they are already weak. Nietzsche's Übermensch, his vision of the superior individual, lives by the same code. He doesn't react. He controls the reactions of others. Musashi proved, with blade and presence alone, that silence, patience, and psychological dominance can be far more powerful than brute strength. So what unites these three giants, Socrates, Steve Jobs, and Musashi? They didn't waste energy on meaningless arguments. They didn't let emotions drive their actions. They didn't play by others' rules. They set the terms themselves. They understood that real power isn't in words, it's in influence. So the next time you feel the urge to argue, ask yourself, am I reacting out of emotion, or am I controlling the situation? Because that's the heart of Nietzsche's message. True power is silent. Why do we argue? Why do we feel this need to prove we're right? To push back, to defend ourselves, even when we know deep down the argument is going nowhere. Most people think arguments are about finding the truth. They're not. They're about power. The more you argue, the more you reveal about your insecurities, your emotional triggers, and, most dangerously, that someone else is controlling your reaction. Nietzsche understood this at a level modern psychology is only beginning to catch up with. Let's break it down. Why do arguments feel so personal? Have you ever wondered why some debates instantly trigger a deep emotional reaction? Why discussions about politics, religion, or personal beliefs escalate so quickly? It's because for most people, disagreement doesn't feel like a challenge to an idea. It feels like a challenge to who they are. When someone questions our deeply held beliefs, it cuts deeper than logic. It hits identity. We don't just hear you're wrong. We hear you're not good enough, you're flawed, or you're not who you think you are. That's why so many debates turn toxic so fast. Because people aren't just defending opinions, they're defending themselves. And that's exactly why the most powerful individuals throughout history never argue emotionally. Because when someone can make you react emotionally, they control you. The Übermensch, in Nietzsche's philosophy, refuses to fall into this trap. He doesn't react out of impulse. He watches, he analyzes, and only then, only if it serves his greater purpose, he decides whether or not to respond. The hidden driver, validation. Let's dig even deeper. At the core of many arguments is something even more fragile than ego: the need for validation. Most people aren't arguing for truth. They're arguing to be seen, to be approved of, to be acknowledged by the crowd. Nietzsche understood this well. He believed that most human beings crave acceptance from the group, what we might call the herd. They argue not to discover truth, but to gain applause. They want to be right, and they want others to see them as right. But the Übermensch, he doesn't need applause. He doesn't need validation. He creates his own truth and lets his actions speak louder than any argument. Look at the greatest minds and leaders in history. Did they waste time responding to every critic? No. They focused on their vision, ignored distractions, and let the results of their work do the talking. What psychology now confirms Nietzsche was far ahead of his time. Modern psychology now confirms what he intuited over a century ago. Let's break it down. Power dynamics in social settings studies show that the most powerful people in any group aren't the ones who talk the most. They're the ones who control the flow of the conversation. They don't interrupt. They don't over-explain. They speak with precision. And when they do speak, people lean in because every word carries weight. That's why powerful leaders rarely raise their voices. They don't need to. They've already created an aura of authority through silence. Calmness equals persuasion. Behavioral psychology tells us something else. People who stay calm and composed in a debate are far more persuasive than those who get defensive or angry. Why? Because humans are biologically wired to equate calmness with confidence. Nietzsche believed that true power came from self-mastery. The Übermensch is not a slave to emotion. He doesn't react, he chooses, and that choice makes him untouchable. Let's put it into perspective. If someone insults you and you lash out, you've already lost. If someone challenges you and you feel the need to defend yourself, you've given them power. But if you stay grounded, observe, and respond only when it truly matters, you've already won without ever needing to fight. The power of restraint and the wisdom to choose your battles. If you find yourself pulled into an argument just to prove you're right, you've already lost. Because the moment your actions are driven by ego, not purpose, your power slips away. But if you take a breath, observe calmly, and only respond when it serves your purpose, you haven't just stayed in control, you've already won. Nietzsche's philosophy was never about staying silent forever. It was about strategic engagement, choosing your battles wisely, and asking yourself in each moment of tension, am I speaking because I choose to, or because I feel pressured to? Am I reacting out of emotion, or am I responding from control? Is this debate worth my energy, or is it just feeding my ego? Because as Nietzsche saw it, real power isn't in words. It's in the space before the words, the pause, the silence that makes others lean in, the moment when you decide that speaking now matters. That's the silent trick, the one that flips the dynamic, not with force, but with precision. Should you always stay silent? But let's be clear, silence isn't a magic solution. It's not a rule to follow blindly. Silence can be a weapon. But if you wield it carelessly, if you retreat from every conflict, it becomes just as reckless as speaking without thinking. If silence were the only path to power, then history's greatest minds, philosophers, rebels, revolutionaries, would have been forgotten. But they weren't. They spoke. They challenged. They engaged with purpose, because true power lies not in avoiding conflict, but in knowing when to engage and when to hold back. Nietzsche's will to power, conflict as transformation. Many people misunderstand Nietzsche's idea of the will to power. They think it's about retreating, staying detached, avoiding struggle altogether, but that's not it. His concept was never about passivity. It was about domination, about growth, about pushing through resistance and overcoming the self. Power doesn't come from hiding. It comes from control. Avoiding conflict entirely isn't wisdom. It's fear, dressed up as restraint. True mastery comes from using conflict as a tool, not running from it. Nietzsche's Übermensch doesn't waste time on petty fights, but he doesn't shy away from necessary ones either. He knows that some battles are crucibles, furnaces that forge strength, clarity, and transformation. So why do most people avoid arguments? because they're uncomfortable, because they're messy, because they might lose. But Nietzsche saw things differently. He believed discomfort breeds growth. Avoiding challenges keeps the mind soft. But leaning into struggle? That's where strength is born. Imagine a warrior who never trains, a sword that's never tested. It might look sharp, but it won't last in real battle. In the same way, a mind that's never challenged remains dull, unexamined, fragile. Without tension, ideas stay untested. Without resistance, convictions remain hollow. Think about the boldest minds in human history. Galileo, condemned for challenging the Church's view of the cosmos. Socrates, sentenced to death for questioning the beliefs of his society. Nietzsche himself, dismissed as a madman in his time. But today, their ideas shape how we think. Their strength didn't come from silence alone. It came from choosing their battles wisely and facing the storm when it truly mattered. Argue to transform, not to prove. The most powerful people in history didn't engage in every debate. They weren't afraid of conflict, but they used it with intention. Take Socrates, for example. He didn't attack people's beliefs head-on. He simply asked questions until those beliefs collapsed under their own weight. He didn't argue to destroy. He argued to reveal. Nietzsche's own writings were built the same way. He didn't aim to comfort readers. He aimed to disrupt them, to provoke, to shake them out of mental complacency. And Steve Jobs? He didn't avoid conflict either. He used it to push people past their limits, to challenge what was possible, to spark innovation. He didn't fight for validation. He fought to make ideas real. The Übermensch's rule of engagement, the Übermensch, Nietzsche's superior individual, doesn't argue to feed his ego. He argues with purpose. So, when should you engage? When the argument makes you sharper, when it reveals a deeper truth, when it helps someone grow, or helps you grow, when it shifts the balance of power in your favor. But here's when you should not engage. When you're just defending your pride, when the other person isn't willing to grow, when it's a petty, emotional shouting match, when silence itself holds more power than anything you could say. Because arguing without strategy, that's weakness, but arguing with precision, that's power. Nietzsche wasn't afraid of arguments. He embraced them, but only on his own terms. If a conflict drains you, leave it. If it sharpens you, step into it. If it's just noise, ignore it. Because true power doesn't come from silence alone. It comes from knowing when to speak and when to remain like an unmoved mountain. If you only had 100 words left now, imagine this. You wake up tomorrow. A voice tells you, you only have 100 words left to speak in your entire life. Suddenly, every sentence is sacred. Every word is a choice. Would you waste them arguing with someone who won't listen? Would you use them proving your worth to someone who already doubts you? Or would you choose your words like a master swordsman sharpens his final blade? Because that's what real power looks like. Nietzsche understood something most people miss. Words are currency. The more you spend them without care, the less valuable they become. So the next time you're on the verge of arguing, pause, breathe, observe. Notice how the other person reveals their insecurities, just through the way they speak. Notice how their tone exposes their fear, their volume reveals their need for control, and then, when the time is right, speak or don't. Because true power isn't loud, it's quiet. It's the art of making others question themselves, without you ever needing to convince them. Here's the challenge. Next time someone tries to bait you into a fight, don't react. Watch, wait, and decide. Because the moment you choose your silence, you've already reclaimed your power. If you found this valuable, and you want more insights on philosophy, psychology, and power, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon. We've only scratched the surface of the ideas that shape how we think, lead, and live. So stay sharp, stay powerful, and we'll see you in the next deep dive.